We reviewed 10 bioinformatics CVs that our subscribers sent us, and here are 7 common mistakes we keep seeing, with examples from real CVs and how we would fix them. I saw a lot of parallels to what I learned working at Google's genomics team about writing self-assessment for PERF, Google's performance review system, especially understanding what sets apart senior from junior people and how to show proof and quantify your achievements. So let's dive in, starting at the top of the CV with mistake number 1, irrelevant information. You only have 1 or maybe 2 pages to make your case, so don't waste space on things that don't matter, like a large fancy box or a picture of your face. You don't need to list your phone number, definitely not 2, unless you want recruiters to call you, which you don't. Just write your name and email and link to relevant websites like GitHub and maybe LinkedIn. That's it, nothing fancy. This seems like nitpicking, but if a hiring manager spends 10 seconds on your CV, there's no need for them to spend 2 of those seconds wondering why you mention you have a driver's license. If you have a summary of who you are at the top, make sure it's actually a summary. It can't take up half the page. Something like this is more appropriate. Just a few sentences about your background and what you're looking for. Mistake number 2, including a useless skills section. Almost every CV I've ever seen has a skills section, and every time I look at it, I think, this is not useful. It doesn't tell me what you use the technology for or how familiar you are with it. For example, what does it mean to have an AWS skill? Did you just use the website to spin up a VM once? Do you store data in S3, or do you do DevOps work? Listing technologies just generates more questions than it answers. Get rid of it. Same with listing progress bars. It's a made-up metric. I have no idea what 3 out of 5 means. I would rather hear about how you use Python and R within your work. So take everything that's important in the skills section and find it a home in the work experience or projects where you use that skill. If you didn't use it that much or can't answer basic questions about the technology, don't include it. It'll become very obvious during interviews, and I've seen it tank entire interviews because then people can't trust the rest of the CV. I understand the concern that automated filters will discard your CV if you don't list specific keywords in there, but you won't get filtered out if you just put those technologies next to where you describe your projects. If you still insist on putting a separate skills section on your CV though, despite it being a terrible waste of space, at least put it at the bottom of the CV so it doesn't take up those valuable first 30 seconds when someone is glancing at your CV for the first time. Mistake number 3, listing basic tasks under each work experience. Companies are not looking for people who are just assigned tasks and told exactly how to do them and do them. They want people who can take a vague problem, come up with a bunch of potential solutions and recommendations, and then execute. Even better, they want someone who can spot these problems in the first place. So you can't just say you developed an RNA-seq pipeline. Why? Aren't there hundreds of those already? Why did you create your own? Was there something special about your data type or sample type that required it? How did you validate it? That might be obvious to you, but it's not to anyone else reading your resume. Similarly, don't just say you build pipelines in Python and R for processing large biological data. That's basically all of bioinformatics. That's meaningless. You need to be more specific. And if you're ever saying that you optimized a pipeline, you just have to say by how much it improved. You must have measured that, otherwise you would have reverted your changes, right? You cannot say you optimized the process without measuring how much better it got. Numbers. A good example of how to do this is where the candidate improved the accuracy of a genetic test. Of course, you can't always easily measure the impact. In those cases, don't make numbers up. For example, saying you enhanced student understanding by 80% kind of sounds made up. Unless you saw their grades improving or you ran a survey, but then you have to say that explicitly. Whereas for something like improving runtime or accuracy, it's easy to imagine how you might have measured that, so you don't necessarily have to state those explicitly. Even if you saw a subjective improvement, mention that. At the beginning, most students didn't know what a for loop was. Now they can do basic scripting. One concern we heard was that this would make CVs too verbose. In reality, most CVs are already too verbose, and conveying the impact of your work can help focus your descriptions. Let me show you what I mean. In this CV, notice all 3 lines here are basically saying the same thing. Taught biologists and non-coders an introductory course on coding, emphasizing his role in data analysis and bioinformatics. Successfully taught individuals with no prior computer science background to write Python code and understand its syntax. Effectively explained algorithms to non-coders using real-world examples, enhancing their understanding by approximately 80%. Bullet points should describe different projects or tasks, not describe the same thing you did in 3 different ways. You can replace the first 2 lines with, taught a Python course to 20 biologists. If you designed the course, make sure to say that. And instead of the 80%, describe how you saw the students improve. For example, students went from no coding experience to writing scripts for data filtering and plotting. In most cases, focusing on impact actually helps trim the CV down to just the essential parts. Mistake number 4, subjective self-praise. Oh my god. Do not under any circumstances call yourself or your work innovative or cutting edge. It's really off-putting. You wouldn't come up to someone at a networking session and say, "Hi, I'm Maria, I'm innovative." Don't do it here or on LinkedIn. Instead, show, don't tell. Instead of saying you contribute innovative solutions, show me those innovative solutions you come up with when describing your experience. Don't just say you're self-motivated or a good communicator. Prove it. Show me examples of you proactively solving problems and communicating with stakeholders. Similarly, avoid sentences that don't mean anything. For example, don't just say you established the vision and strategic direction of the organization. If a sentence gives you no more information than when you started, get rid of it. In this case, I would replace that with, I changed the strategy from X to Y and it had result Z. That's how you show you are a strategic thinker. On the other hand, don't downplay your work. I once reviewed a friend's CV where I had to ask 3 follow-up questions before learning that she had been promoted in her role, but did not mention it in her CV at all. Mistake number 5, missing date ranges. This was driving Robert and I crazy when we looked at all these CVs. We were trying to piece together the timelines and we kept getting confused. First of all, your CV should not be a puzzle. Make sure that you have date ranges everywhere. This was especially missing on education. For example, here it says this PhD is expected in 2027, but I want to know when it started so I can tell if the experience listed elsewhere in the CV was work experience outside of school or not. Or in this CV, is August 2024 when you started your master's degree or when you graduated? And by the way, if you recently graduated or are currently in school, mention that at the very top. It needs to be obvious how much work experience you have. I understand in some cases you might want to make it vague because you took a break to do something else. Look, nobody cares that you have holes in your CV. It's more important to have a clear CV. Mistake number 6, duplicating content. Don't split up your experiences into 2 separate sections. It's really hard to follow. For example, in this CV under experience, they say they analyzed linkage disequilibrium blocks in Alzheimer's disease. But under projects, we see basically the same thing. And the date ranges fit within each other, which is just confusing. Don't make the hiring team do this kind of detective work. Each project should live in one place, preferably under the relevant work experience, but we'd recommend using a project section like this if you did the project on your own, separately from anything else on your resume. Same with this CV, where there's information about what they did during their master's, but under education and under projects. That's confusing. Are these the same? Are they different? It's hard to tell. Mistake number 7. This is my favorite. Lack of links. We were surprised how rarely we saw anyone including links to evidence within the text of the CV, which is really a shame because it's so helpful for hiring managers to be able to quickly learn more about any item on your CV that's interesting to them, which massively sets you apart. This is something that I really took home from the self-assessments at Google, I always am now including, even in my resume, I included like a link to a tweet that shows that I was the tech lead on a project. And it's just really nice to include this type of evidence because it lets you quickly just check as a hiring manager whether people's claims are correct. So you can link to GitHub code, you can link to any public announcements about the project that you led, especially if it mentions you. That is just gold. So that's why on my CV, there's a link to a tweet. That's all we had for now. Thank you so much to those who submitted their CVs. It's really useful for us to be able to see actual CVs in order to give advice to everyone watching this channel. So thank you so much. And let us know if you have made any of these mistakes on your CV in the comments. All right, bye.